Angelo Ricci, Joe Chanek, and Manuel Silva had a plan. They wanted to pay a visit to the terrible old man. This old guy lives all alone in a super old house on Water Street, near the sea. People say he's ridiculously rich, but also really weak and frail. That combination makes him a perfect target for guys like Ricci, Chanek, and Silva, who, let's be honest, are professional thieves. The people of Kingsport have a lot to say about the terrible old man. Most of their stories keep folks like Ricci and his buddies away from him, even though it's practically a sure thing that he's hiding a huge fortune somewhere in his dusty old house. The man is a total mystery. He's supposedly so old that no one alive remembers him being young. Rumor has it, he used to be a captain of East India clipper ships back in the day. He's also incredibly quiet. So quiet that almost no one even knows his real name. His house is surrounded by a creepy yard full of old twisted trees. In the yard, he's got this strange collection of big stones, all arranged in weird groups and painted to look like idols from some far-off Eastern temple. The whole thing is so weird, it scares off most of the neighborhood kids, even the ones who usually love throwing rocks at his windows or making fun of his long white hair and beard. But the real spooky stuff is inside the house. Sometimes braver or nosier people sneak up to the old man's place and peek through the dirty windows. They claim to see something really strange. A bare room with a table covered in odd bottles. Each bottle has a little piece of lead hanging inside it, swinging like a tiny pendulum on a string. The weirdest part? The old man talks to these bottles, calling them by names like Jack, Scarface, Long Tom, Spanish Joe, Peters, and Mate Ellis. And, believe it or not, when he talks to a bottle, the lead pendulum inside starts to swing, as if it's answering him. People who've seen the tall, skinny, terrible old man having these weird conversations with his bottles usually don't go back to watch him again. But Angelo Ricci, Joe Chanek, and Manuel Silva weren't from around Kingsport. They were outsiders from a mix of different backgrounds and didn't care about the old New England traditions or the creepy stories about the terrible old man. To them, he was just an old, frail guy with shaky hands who could barely walk without his knotted cane. Honestly, they even felt a little sorry for him in their own way. He was lonely, avoided by everyone, and even the local dogs barked at him for no reason. But feelings are one thing, and business is another. And for professional thieves like these three, an old, weak man who doesn't trust banks and pays for everything at the village store with gold and silver coins from 200 years ago, is practically begging to be robbed. The three thieves decided April 11th would be the night for their visit. Ricci and Silva were supposed to handle the old man directly, while Chanek waited for them in a car parked on Ship Street. right by the gate in the tall back wall of the old man's yard. They wanted to keep things low-key, just in case the cops showed up unexpectedly. To avoid raising suspicion, each of them left their homes separately. Ricci and Silva met up on Water Street, right outside the old man's gate. The moonlight shining on the painted stones in the yard, through the twisted branches of the old trees, gave them a bit of an eerie feeling, but they weren't about to let superstition distract them. They had a job to do. They knew getting the old man to spill the beans about his stash of gold and silver might be tricky. Old sea captains like him were known to be stubborn and cranky, but he was ancient, weak, and outnumbered. Ricci and Silva were experts at making people talk, even if they didn't want to. And if the old man screamed, well, they had ways to keep things quiet. As they crept up to the one window that had a light on, they could hear the terrible old man inside. He was muttering in a childish voice to his bottles, the ones with the little swinging pendulums. Ignoring how strange it sounded, they put on their masks, walked up to the weathered wooden door, and knocked politely. Chanek sat nervously in the car, parked by the terrible old man's back gate on Ship Street, fidgeting and glancing at his watch every few minutes. Waiting felt endless, and the dark, creepy surroundings didn't help. He still couldn't shake off the horrible screams he'd heard, coming from the old house not long after the job had started. He had specifically told Ricci and Silva to go easy on the frail old sea captain. Why had things gotten so loud? The longer the wait, the more uneasy he felt. What was taking so long? Had the old man died before spilling the location of his treasure? Were Ricci and Silva turning the place upside down looking for it? The silence was unnerving, and Chanek didn't like sitting in the dark near that eerie house. Then he heard it, a soft tapping sound, like footsteps coming from the other side of the gate. He froze, listening as someone fumbled with the rusty latch. The heavy wooden gate creaked open slowly, and under the pale light of a dim street lamp, he leaned forward to see what his partners were bringing out. But it wasn't Ricci and Silva who came through the gate. It was the terrible old man. He stood there, leaning on his knotted cane, smiling in a way that sent chills down Chanek's spine. For the first time, Chanek noticed the old man's eyes. They were yellow, an unnatural, terrifying yellow. Small towns like Kingsport don't see much excitement, so when the tides later washed up 3 unrecognizable bodies, slashed and mangled like they'd been attacked with dozens of cutlasses, and stomped on by countless boots, it became the talk of the spring and summer. People also whispered about a strange abandoned car found on Ship Street and about the awful, inhuman cries some residents claimed to have heard that night. Maybe it was just a stray animal, or maybe a bird passing through. Who could say? As for the terrible old man, he didn't care about the gossip at all. He was a private, quiet person by nature, and age had only made him more so. Besides, for someone who had spent his youth as a sea captain, he had surely seen far more terrifying and extraordinary things in his time than anything Kingsport had to offer now.